Începe, da? Welcome, Dr. Legros, to the starting point. This is the name of our program. Thank you for accepting the invitation.
Glad to help in any way I can.
We meet quite often in the church,
Yes.
but it will be the first time we have such a lengthy conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, where was your starting point in life? Tell us a little bit about the place, about the family of origin, about the conditions.
Okay. I was born in Haiti, and that's an island in the Caribbean that shares the space with another republic, the Dominican Republic. My parents immigrated to the U.S. when I was 13.
13. So you still have vivid memories from Haiti.
I do, absolutely.
How was life for you? Did you live in a city or in a rural area?
Actually, I lived in a suburb of Haiti, Port-au-Prince, and we had a happy life every Sunday after church because we were Sunday keepers at the time.
What was the church you were attending?
It was a Catholic church.
Catholic church.
And so I grew up a Catholic, and I changed religion when I was 18.
18.
But to
we'll
go back
about that, yeah.
Okay, but
so
to
you
go
have
back to
good memories from going to church?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, maybe
and being very devout.
Yeah.
And also going to church, not just on Sunday, but sometimes on Saturday afternoons. We had programs for children as well. And very cocooned life. My parents took very good care of us.
Yes.
And
so you didn't feel poverty, lack of food? Or
No, we were fairly middle class, upper middle class. And my parents worked hard. They were both civil servants. My father in the Ministry of Finances, and my mother was teaching French in the public school system. But I've always remembered them being very hard workers. Yeah. And
do you have siblings?
I do. I'm the oldest girl of my parents' marriage. The oldest child. There were 4 girls. The youngest passed away a few years ago. And I have a stepbrother from my father before my parents were married.
I see.
From my father's side.
What were your plays? What were your activities as a child?
We had a huge...
Roaming in nature?
Yes, we had a huge yard in both houses that we lived in. And climbing trees, just like the boys. I was a tomboy, as you say. And playing marbles, riding my bicycle inside right outside of the house in the yard. And at one point we lived in a coastal city from the time I was 4 to the time I was 8. So they had promenades, so every evening, so that we could fall asleep faster, there was a lady, a nanny, who would walk with us along the promenade for a good 30 minutes or so. I can understand 4-year-olds walking 30 minutes now that I'm thinking back at this. And so it was quite interesting.
Do you have also memories of observing people living in poverty and lacking the basic necessities?
I had. As a child, I was very sensitive to other people's needs. So we had a lady who cooked for us. We had a lady, a nanny for the children.
Yes.
And then we had a lady who washed because we didn't have washing machines.
Sure.
And I remember...
that you were working for you only or serving other families?
No, just my family. Just the family. And then except for the gardener, everybody would go home at night, and the nanny also stayed with us.
I see.
And I always felt like giving them my food. I would hide my toys and then try to give them for their children. Yes, and I was in a fairly elitist private school from the time I was 8 to the time I was 13. And many of my classmates were not very kind to the people who work at their house. When they came to pick them up from school, the people had to call them Mr. So-and-so or Miss So-and-so. And this is an adult calling a little child. And so I told my parents, I don't really like that. And then they called me by my name, and I called them, by their name. Then I said, we should call them Mr. or Mrs. because these are adults.
That as a
I
child.
did.
Interesting,
Yeah, and politically, I was always against the government. And my father would say, we can talk about that at home, but not in the streets or not.
Wow, I forgot about it, but it was a time of the dictatorship.
Under Duvalier.
Duvalier, oui.
Yes, father and then son.
Son, yeah.
Yes.
Papa Doc.
Papa Doc and Baby Doc. Baby Doc, yeah, exactly. But, there was so much repression, it was unbelievable. So one had to be mindful of what they were saying outside of the house. Yeah.
Yeah, I also grew in a dictatorship. It was the other side of the political spectrum.
Yes,
but
the communism.
Also,
yes.
I also know what does it mean to shut up,
Uh-huh.
to keep your opinions for yourself.
Exactly.
Otherwise, you have to pay for being too opinionated.
That's true. And paying may mean your life. Yeah. What was the name of the president of the communist?
Ceausescu.
Ceausescu, that's what I thought. Okay. So was he called a president or?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Initially, he was Secretary General of the Communist Party, and that was at the same time the highest position in the country.
Okay.
And later he became president. Yeah. So you know what does it mean to live under an oppressive government?
Yes, absolutely.
How was the Catholic Church relating to the dictatorship?
There were some priests that were considered to be dissidents because they spoke against the government. But the Archbishop, if I recall, was very good friend with the Duvaliers. And so there were factions within the church that were either for or against. Yeah.
You said you used to go every Sunday or even more than that to the church. Do you also remember having some religious life at home?
Yes, we would pray every night with my mother or sometime with the nanny that we had. And the nanny was Seventh-day Adventist.
Really?
So she taught us.
You knew that at that time?
I did, because she sung different songs than what we sung in the Catholic Church. So I asked her what they were. So my fondest memories of childhood was singing before going to bed, with her. And
so she was a nice person.
She was a very nice person.
Very nice person.
Lovely person. Yeah, lovely person. Her name was Amenid. And then she did move to the U.S. after we had moved, but she passed away in New York. I didn't have a chance to see her. But we loved her. And so I'm saying that because when I went away to college, I was 15 and a half, and there were so many things in my dorm. It was a dorm, one floor was for girls, one floor was for boys, but often the boys were found in the girls' room, and decadent. And so I began to seek the Lord.
Really?
And yes, and I remember the songs from my childhood, how comforting they were. And I started to study with Seventh-day Adventists.
Really?
Yeah, so I had cousins.
Where was that?
In college, in Boston.
In Boston?
In Boston, this is where I started.
What were you studying at that time?
I was pre-med.
Pre-med, yeah.
I was pre-med. And so the interesting part was I also had cousins and aunts who were Seventh-day Adventists, and I loved their way of being. And so I questioned, I said, why are they so different from the Catholic friends and relatives that I have? And that's what made me starting to study with Adventists.
So it was difficult for you to understand their perspective and to embrace?
Not so much. I was intrigued, by the way they were, and they were godly women, and godly men and godly cousins. And so I could see that there was a difference.
Yeah.
But my parents
Yeah.
initially
Yeah.
did not want me to become Seventh-day Adventist because we grew up
For
Catholics.
sure, yeah.
But I had many questions about the saints. Why do we have to pray to dead people? Why can't we go directly to Jesus?
Yeah.
And so my mother made me meet our parish priest
Yes.
so he could answer my questions. He could not answer the questions that I had. And then my mother said, well, if that's what you want, by that time I was 18,
18.
actually 17. My mother said, if that's what you want, then go ahead. And she came to my baptism, yeah,
Really?
along with my father. Yeah.
Oh. And you remained in good relations. Yeah, you didn't destroy your family
No,
relation.
no, it
Wonderful.
didn't. Yeah,
Wonderful.
yeah.
Yeah. So, do you have memories about the church, the Adventist church you began attending? What kind of a church
Okay.
was? It was small, it was large, it had youth people or old people, or
Sure,
what are your memories?
Okay, very fond memories because that's where I was baptized. And also, got involved. I became a Sabbath school teacher for the children from, I think, from 9 to 12. And I had a very good relationship with the pastor, the youth pastor. It was a huge church of Haitian immigrants. It was the first Seventh-day Adventist church for Haitian immigrants in Boston. Just like this is the first, maybe is that the first Romanian church?
In this area.
In this area.
Yeah.
And from that church, at least 7 to 8 churches were born. Yeah.
They were French speaking?
They were at that time they were French speaking with some Creole, which is another language spoken in Haiti. But now it's primarily
English.
Creole, and then they have 2 services, one in Creole and then one later in English, because of the children.
Are changing,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
I hear you.
Yeah, I think it was a 500-member church.
Oh my.
A huge church. Yeah. In fact, the pastors, both of the pastors' sons are preachers, are pastors as well. The pastor at Stone Mountain Church, that was the son of the pastor who baptized me.
Yes, Stone Mountain?
Yes,
Close to our place,
yes,
yeah?
yes.
Oh, interesting.
And the pastor, actually the director, I think, of the New England Conference, that's the other brother. Yeah.
Interesting, yeah. Returning a little bit to your education, so you said that in Haiti you were privileged to attend
A very good private school.
Yeah.
It's been a blessing.
To follow the same level of schooling in the United States?
No, I was not, because as an immigrant,
it was for you.
Yeah, it
all
was
of a sudden to go from elite to being an immigrant.
Yeah, and especially an immigrant of black skin. Yeah,
and,
it was not
because there are so many prejudices.
Yes,
I mean, everyone coming from Haiti. I mean, nobody knew what kind of persons were you in Haiti. Haiti is Haiti.
It's considered like the poorest country in the hemisphere. In fact, I had classmates.
Remember what the current resident of White House said about?
Of course, unfortunately. And little does he know.
Everyone.
No. But little does he know that Haitian soldiers fought in the Battle of Savannah and helped with them maintain independence, because otherwise they would all be speaking French, because France was going to be purchasing more land beside Louisiana in the U.S. Yeah, Haitians stopped the revolution from Haiti to the U.S. What happened was that in 1804, Bonaparte had plans to own the United States through battle and whatever. But because they were defeated in Haiti, they could not come up north, and yeah. So
forgotten pages of history.
Exactly. So our current president needs to learn history, and there are Haitian scientists all over the world, physicians. There are more physicians of Haitian descent in the U.S. than there are in Canada than there are in the entire island of Haiti. Yeah, because there's a brain drain, there isn't enough work or enough people to pay for their services.
On one side, but on the other side, that tells a lot about the intellectual powers,
Oh, absolutely.
about the will of power,
Absolutely.
about the dedication and commitment and hard work of those people, because nobody opened arms for them.
No.
Nobody said, "Oh, come, you come from Haiti, we need you."
No,
They had
never.
to go through
Yeah.
many, many, many barriers and
Absolutely.
still to succeed.
Absolutely, absolutely. So going back to my schooling,
Yeah.
so when I arrived in the U.S., I was 13 and they put me in 8th grade, which is usually where 13-year-olds are placed. But hardly spoke English and I was getting straight A's. So clearly the school was not as competitive as it could be. But I had a teacher, my English teacher would stay with me after school
Oh.
and help me with English. And so I ended up the year with having A's in English as
Oh,
well.
bless her heart.
Yeah. And I was correcting my French teacher, the math I had seen 2 years before in Haiti. And so they made me skip the 9th grade, then went directly to the 10th grade. And I was doing so well as well. That time in a private school, that I skipped the 11th grade and then went on to 12th grade.
Wow.
So between junior high and high school, it was done in 3 years instead of 5 years.
Wow.
So that's why I was so much younger when I graduated from college. I mean, from high school.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And how did you choose your line for further studies? You said you went to college studying pre-med, so your mind was already focused on medicine.
Sure.
Why did you choose
So
medicine?
listen, as a child, I was very intrigued by my pediatrician. And so I became curious about the human body. I took extra science courses in high school, human physiology courses, and I was totally enthralled by all the functions of the human body. And so I wanted to be, at first, a pediatrician, then I taught a child psychiatrist, and even through medical school, I thought I would be a child psychiatrist.
Really?
And then I discovered epidemiology and public health, and I left medicine for that, and I never regretted it.
Yeah, so that was, I mean, here you fit better.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So where did you study public health and epidemiology?
At the University of Illinois at Chicago.
Yes.
Is where I graduated many moons ago in 1994. Yeah. And then I came to Atlanta in 1995 to CDC for a fellowship. The fellowship was for 2 years. After the 2 years, if there was a position, you could work. If not, there wasn't a position for me. Then I returned home. At that time, my parents had relocated to Florida, and so I went there. And I managed public health programs and studied for my doctoral degree in organizational leadership. So I stayed 10 years in Florida, and then I returned to Atlanta about 2007.
And you work again for CDC?
I do. I work for CDC.
Would you please explain a little bit, because of those initials maybe?
Yes. So
Yeah.
the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is based here in Atlanta.
The national
It's a national,
headquarters is
yes,
here.
is here in Atlanta.
What's
And
the work? It's part of the government?
it is a federal agency. It's part of the government that is responsible for funding state and local health departments to do the work of public health, which is anything from water and sanitation to mosquito abatement to chronic disease prevention and so on. So the CDC provides guidelines. They also assess, but they don't regulate like other federal agencies. So CDC is one of many federal agencies that belongs to the Department of Health and Human Services. And there's also the Food and Drug Administration, the Center for Medical Services. So there are several, we call them OPDIV, operational divisions of the Department of Health and Human Services. Yeah.
What is your current position with CDC?
So currently, I'm senior public health educator at CDC, working in workforce development with the future public health leaders.
Mhm. So you are a very, very influential person.
Oh,
You are.
yeah, I suppose. I suppose. I never looked at it that way.
For the future for the future workforce or task force in
In
this
public
area
health,
of public health, which is, as you said, education. First of all, education. What are the means of education which are being used here in the United States
Okay.
to
For public
educate?
health?
To educate not so much the future staff for CDC, but to educate the public in the area of public health. What are the venues used for that?
Okay, so there are schools of public health which
Yes.
offer masters in public health and doctoral degrees in public health
Yes.
and certificates also in public health. So at that level, but also each state and local health department also does a lot of teaching of the patients that they see, of going to colleges, going to high school, doing some training as well. Yeah, so it's a broad system with universities being the premier place to teach public health, but the health departments also teach. Yeah.
And are there publications
They're up.
originating from you, or you provide expertise and knowledge to commercial publications? Because health education is present in many of the magazines and
Yes, so we do provide reports, we provide journal articles. Many of the other employees at CDC also have published articles or reports because the guidelines, the CDC publishes a lot of guidelines. For current workers as well. For example, in immunization, there's an entire schedule of when children should have immunization. So CDC publishes that through one of its magazines called MMWR, Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Review. They publish topics of interest, topics du jour. The last one that I saw was an article on Zika prevention, and
you mentioned immunizations. I don't know about America, but in Europe, in some places and in other places around the world, this subject became again very controversial with many people, many families especially, strongly resisting to have their children getting immunizations. And I've seen quite scary statistics showing that when they do that, there are bouts of
if not
disease,
epidemics, yes.
which otherwise could have been considered almost gone.
Eradicated,
Could you speak more about that?
Absolutely. So I can take an example of measles. So in the US, in the 1990s, we stopped measles transmission. So there may be one or two cases here and there, but there was not currently measles epidemics. And so because people choose not to vaccinate their children, then there may have been an imported case from South America, Central America perhaps, and that in itself can create epidemics. And so we're doing surveillance for measles. Well, this was something that was practically almost eradicated, at least in the US. So that's a problem, And the science behind what the people that are deciding not to vaccinate their children, they're listening to or reading shoddy science, nothing really that's evidence-based. We know that vaccines prevent diseases, and
I think there is a big scare about some vaccines contributing to autism.
Yes, and again, the
Again,
researcher in England, uh,
finally, it was discovered, or even he admitted to being unworthy
yes,
research.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, it wasn't sound science. And so can you imagine the number of people that listen to him?
Mhm.
And measles can kill. There are other diphtheria can kill. So, and they do kill, if you're not immunized against those.
Uh, yeah, are vaccines 100% safe?
It depends.
I mean, when I say safe, not safe in the sense of preventing a disease, but not creating problems, not having side effects, I mean, in this respect.
I mean, it depends on the vaccine, but
Uh-huh.
there are minor side effects. And that's why they recommend sometimes when you have a cold or flu, not to be
Uh-huh.
vaccinated at that time, but you can be vaccinated at a later time. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there are people who may be allergic to eggs,
Uh-huh.
which is in some
Yes,
vaccines,
yeah.
and they may not be aware of that, and then they may have an allergic reaction.
So
But
there
I've,
may be here and there, once in a while, a little bit of a problem. But if you look at the big picture,
yeah, it's well worth it. And even some people who don't vaccinate their children, I think they think that if enough people are vaccinated, it's called herd immunity.
yes, herd
That means
immunity. Yeah.
that can prevent their child from being ill as well. But I would not want to play Russian roulette with my
Yeah.
child. Yeah, so.
And when more children are not vaccinated, it's affecting not only themselves, they may become carriers for others.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's
Yeah,
both
yeah,
ways.
absolutely. That's,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's really strange to have available. I mean, to be offered all of those and to decide not to.
Exactly.
And as you
Exactly.
said, based on unreliable, flimsy
Yeah.
evidences or
Shoddy
yeah.
science. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
How you said it already. You are a woman. How do you feel when you hear such things and you know everything is available?
Yeah.
It's for
Yeah.
free.
Yeah.
And to see people resisting.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it's outrageous, to see that happen, and so that's why we have to talk about educating populations, especially the ones that are more at risk, and making it easy for them to get vaccinated. For example, if they're here at a doctor's visit for something else, the doctor then needs to ask, have you been vaccinated against this or that? Because otherwise it's a missed opportunity that here you're somewhat captive, you're in the doctor's office, and so if they can give you a vaccine, then they should. Yeah. And there are more people who get vaccinated or vaccinate their children after physicians have recommended or asked them, have you had your diphtheria, your tetanus shot, and so on.
what are other major areas of work, of activity for prevention of diseases you are responsible for?
Okay. So during the Ebola outbreak, I was asked by the Center for Global Health. CDC has about 10 centers and institutes, and one for chronic disease, one for HIV, STD, and TB, others for state, local, territorial health departments. And so I don't necessarily work in the prevention arena, except when there's a need. For example, with the Zika virus, I was asked to help on what they call a help desk. With Ebola, I was the lead epidemiologist in Mali. And also I did some work with prevention, infection prevention and control in Guinea. So that was more directly related to prevention. But my work now in workforce development primarily is in training future public health leaders
Yes.
in leadership development and team challenges or team building and so on.
You mentioned already a number of foreign countries. Are you also involved in training international staff?
I have. So I spent 3 months in Tanzania, actually in 2010. And I taught the locally employed staff how to look at their data and come up with what we call abstracts to publish or either to send to conferences. And there were 2 articles published as a result of that, and 3 presentations in US conferences. Yeah.
What is the current status of a disease which was very much in the forefront of the public attention, but not so much now, HIV and AIDS?
Ah, okay.
It almost disappeared from the public interest. Did the disease disappear?
No, the disease did not disappear, and there are several programs that are funded both in the US and also international. To President Bush, who was the first one who created what they call the PEPFAR program. It's a program that funds HIV prevention and treatment activities worldwide. Because there's treatment, not cure, but treatment for HIV, for AIDS disease, people don't talk so much about that, but I can imagine that having to take 20 pills every day to stay alive may not be the best way of a quality of life. There are still pockets where there's high HIV infection rates.
In the United States?
Even in the United
Even in
States,
the United
certainly,
States,
yeah. So black women in the US, one of the fastest growing groups to have HIV.
Why?
Yeah, well, there are several factors. I have a chapter in a book, Women Voices, Poverty in the United States, that talks about how poverty can act as a social determinant of health in several diseases, including HIV. So because of lack of work, women may sell their bodies, and also the epidemic of people who inject drugs. That's another factor towards that. And many of the black women who are infected may not have money, and that put them at a higher risk of acquiring HIV, because their partners may not tell them that they're HIV positive, and yet they depend on the partner for help and
to make a living.
Yeah.
When HIV came for the first time in the attention of the public, it was attached with great stigma, moral stigma. And probably in the mind of many people it's still like that. But to put it bluntly, I think many people, probably even Christians, think if they suffer, they did it, they deserve it.
They deserve it.
We don't care.
Yeah.
Is that justified?
I can go back to the Bible and see many examples where people ask. There was a blind man where people asked whether he or his parents had sinned. And I think that's that same mentality today.
There should be a sin. There
was a sin, yeah. So that they deserve it because they slept with someone that they shouldn't have slept with, and so on. I'm not placed on this earth to be a judge for anyone. So, and knowing that there are other factors that come into play when people place themselves at risk for infection. And so I would not be the one to say that they deserve it. But I do know as a Christian that sin does lead to moral death and also doesn't lead to eternal life.
Yeah.
And that's for God to judge. Yeah. So at the last minute, someone can change their mind and
Sure.
ask God for help, just like the thief on the cross. So
And Jesus left us such a powerful example when he said, "He who did not sin, take the first
So,
rock and
yeah.
kill her."
Absolutely.
I mean, we are all sinners.
Absolutely.
If every sin we do would result into that,
Yes.
David
Yeah.
in Psalm 130 says, if you would keep the memory of our sin, who would be able to stand before you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And he sends as far as the west is from the east, once we ask for forgiveness, then that's how far our sins are. Yeah,
Yes, yes,
absolutely.
sure.
Yeah. And I always find peace in one of my favorite Bible verses. He will keep thee in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee. And one can unfortunately become ill, and yet that doesn't mean that they shouldn't give glory to God. And I find the biggest peace in my moments where I'm ill. And that's when I realize His grace is sufficient for me.
Did you have such experiences?
I have.
Yes.
I have. In the past 2 years, I was in a car accident.
It was quite severe.
It was quite severe, yeah. It was
What
quite
happened?
severe.
I mean,
Someone rear-ended my car, yeah. And the car was...
In what way impacted your health? You
okay.
had fractures, you had...
Yeah, ended up with herniated disc and, yeah.
Oh.
So
For a while you were not able to function.
No, I wasn't. And
How
then
it was for you?
it was difficult. I was mad at first. Yeah, it was difficult. But I realized, like, just because I'm a Christian doesn't mean I'm not going to have trials and tribulations. And I gave God the glory because I could have lost a limb, I could have died, and so many things would have happened. So I'm grateful for the good that did happen. And I think every time I'm ill, I become more sensitive to other people's needs. So I think God is working with me.
So it's a blessing in
It's
disguise.
a blessing in disguise. It's a blessing in disguise.
Yeah. And then something else, I think, happened.
Yes, I fell. I was on my way to an assignment to the Ivory Coast. And one day there was water on the floor in my house, which I didn't know was there, and I fell. It was a really bad fall. I was out of work for 3 months. Yeah, and then when I went back to work, I worked part-time for a bit and work from home. And then I had to go back to the office. Yeah. And when you're ill and you're laying on your back for hours and hours, then you have a lot of time to think and meditate on the word.
Yeah.
So I think that may be God's way of telling me, you need to stop and spend more time with me. And so now I'm spending time, a little more time, even though I'm not ill anymore.
I began asking difficult questions.
Yes.
May I go a little further?
Okay, maybe. As long as I have the prerogative to not answer.
Yeah. You spoke so nicely about the beginning of your way with the Lord, and the joy, the enthusiasm. Were you able to follow exactly like that all the time?
I wish I could say yes, but that is not the case. When I was very young, I married someone who was raised Seventh-day Adventist, so who knew more about Adventism than me as a new convert.
Yes.
But he was really the devil in person.
Really?
Yeah. And so, I mean, to this day, his dad just died recently. He didn't go to the funeral. So and his parents always told me they had no idea that's the kind of life that I had with him. I should have spoken to them about it. But we were living in different states. At that time, he had moved to Minneapolis to go to medical school, and then I moved there a year later. And I asked him to leave. He wouldn't leave, so I just left and
Mm.
filed for divorce. And at that time, I was totally disappointed in Adventism, not realizing that it's not Adventism, it's him, as a person who was not a good
Yeah,
person.
but
Yeah.
because he had been for long in the Adventist
Yes.
church, you consider him to be a image bearer of the
Exactly,
Adventist
and that
church.
was not the case.
Mm.
And then another thing, when I was a young woman, around that time I was maybe 24, 25 years old, there was an Adventist evangelist who came to work to give a series of sermons, and I was helping him,
Yeah.
and he went after me, like,
Oh.
yeah, and I thought that was so disgusting, and I
It
said, I don't
was,
want to have
absolutely.
anything, I don't want to have anything to do with
Absolutely.
Adventist. And I left the church and just came back 15 years ago. Yeah. But I left when I was about 25, 26, yeah.
So how was your life
When I
between?
left,
Yeah.
I was a good, I was a good
Sure.
person, as if I didn't go to church,
Were you
and
able to keep your connection with God, to pray, to?
at that time, no, because my younger sister had passed away, and
Oh,
she was a
another blow.
wonderful person.
Another blow about
And
the same
exactly
time.
about,
Too
in
much,
fact,
too much.
too much. In fact, her death precipitated my asking for a divorce because my ex-husband wasn't going to change. Everything that's in the Bible that you're not supposed to do as a married person, he did all of that. And so I had ground, for divorce. And then I was mad at God because I said, my sister was a wonderful person. Why did you take her life? So she was 25 when she passed away. Why did you take her life, And so I was mad at God for maybe a month and a half. And then I slowly began to realize, that it's a fight between good and evil. God would not want us to live like that in pain and
Absolutely.
yeah. And so I began to make peace with God, and I started to visit Adventist churches, but not consistently.
Yes.
Yeah, but it took a car accident. I've been in so many car accidents, and I was only responsible for one, for me to become ill. And then I was in the hospital with a broken foot. And then I said, God, if you take me out of this alive, then I will give my life to you completely. And then that's when I started to go back, and then I got rebaptized. In fact, my pastor who rebaptized me was from Romania. Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
Do you
Yeah.
remember his name?
I do. Dr. Greg Liodin.
Oh, yeah, yeah, sure.
Do you know him?
Yes, I give him some classes in the ministerial training,
Oh, really?
and I performed his marriage.
Oh, yes, to Laura. Oh, you know him quite well.
Of
Okay.
course, of course.
What a small world.
And Laura's father had been my mentor.
Okay.
For
Okay. I know he was a
all my life.
pastor.
Yeah,
Okay.
an
Okay.
outstanding,
Yeah.
outstanding pastor.
Yeah. Wow. Very good.
Yeah, we live in a small world.
We do live in a small world.
Yeah. After so many, big accomplishments, big blows and loss, and again, standing high. And how do you look at God?
Well, I look at God as my protector, my redeemer. Anything that happened to me, I say it could have been worse if it weren't for God. And so I always try to look for the good in everything. So I look at God as a friend, as a savior, as someone who redeemed me. I have a very good concept of who He is, and I can hardly wait for the second coming of Christ.
Why?
Well, there won't be any more suffering. There
Yes.
won't, and then I'll get to see my sister, who passed away when she was 25.
Yeah, but your occupation is not. It will be no longer needed.
Exactly. There won't be any need for prevention, so
Yes.
we'll all be healthy. Yeah, I say that all
The
the
same
time.
with the church. You had both happy and ugly experiences.
Yes.
What are your feelings now?
About the
The
church?
church.
Oh, truly that uh, God wants us to mingle with each other, with believers, and knowing that believers are also sinners. So
As we are.
yeah, so they are, and I myself, I'm also a sinner. And so I think the attitude is to have one attitude of studying together to change our characters, because that's the only thing that we will take with us, not our cars, not our homes, nothing at all. And so as church brothers and sisters, we need to help each other develop that character
Mm.
and show more love. So because that's what God wants us to do, to love him first and then to love each other as brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
And remember that there's a
Yes.
battle
Mm.
between good and evil.
Absolutely.
And sometimes a sister or a brother may do something, be an instrument of Satan to do something bad. But you have to realize that it's not so much that brother or that sister, it's Satan that's behind that. Yeah.
Uh, in the meantime, until the Lord comes, we have
Yes,
something to do.
absolutely.
And Jesus also gave us an example of giving what we have
Mm.
and taking care especially of the most underprivileged.
Mhm.
I think this is also an area you are very much interested in, health
Absolutely.
equity and social
Absolutely.
justice.
Absolutely.
Share with us a little bit of your thoughts and activities
In that area?
activities in this
Okay.
area.
So I think as a child, I was exposed to poverty because one would drive to school and you will see beggars after church on Sunday. At that time, Sunday church, you will see beggars by the doors of the church. So I think I got sensitized to the need of others at a very early age by those experiences. And I continued to follow my interests in justice by being parts of various committees at work on diversity and inclusion, or even at school. When I was in medical school, I was the director of the Martin Luther King Institute that we did every year, where I brought in speakers from supposedly minority groups, because really people of color are not a minority, because there's more people of color in the world. But I think the minority has a pejorative view as well.
Yeah.
And so I would brought speakers from underrepresented groups to speak to the entire medical school community on Martin Luther King Day, which is happening in a couple of weeks actually. And even this weekend, on Friday, I was at the Civil and Human Rights Museum giving a talk on unconscious bias, defeating unconscious bias, and how we can help to be more loving individuals. And hopefully, the more people who read or are aware of that, the more likely we will not have so many discordance among us. I gave that same talk in Toronto last year, and I'm going to Hamburg in June to do the same thing again. And so that's where I find joy in trying to teach about peace and living well with each other, yeah,
Yeah.
and more equitable um, business dealing and a more equitable society, treating each other as you would want to be treated.
Do you see signs of change, of improvement?
Well, the folks that are 45 young people in early college, first year or second year of college, and they're all from different countries of the world. And I had two of those young ladies at my house during the weekend. One woman was from Turkey, and and the other young lady was from Denmark. And then just by talking to them, and also by seeing how they responded to my talk and to other exercises, about courageous leadership that other people did with them, there's hope in the youth. The older generation, only if they're willing to change. I mean, there is such a thing as it's more difficult to change as you age. Yeah, but but the Christ can change their
Absolutely.
ways, so we still need to continue to pray.
So we have the topic for our next conversation.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for participation and for sharing many, many facets of your life and of your work and of your ministry and your dreams for improving this world until the Lord
Until
comes,
the Lord comes,
and
yes.
He will solve every problem for good. Thank you very much.
You
May
are so
God
welcome. Thank
continue
you so much,
to
Elder.
protect, to inspire, and to empower you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.